I'm going to open with a quote that is a quote that I dearly love. I keep it in front of me on my desk. And that is, joy is the most infallible sign of the presence of God. It really is. It's just amazing. So Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a French Jesuit priest and a paleontologist and a scientist. And in World War I was actually a stretcher carrier out in the battlefields. Amazing wisdom. So it is, for me, the most infallible sign of God when I am expressing joy. And if you think about it, there's a connection that you feel, I think, when you're joyful. And it's a connection inside and it's a connection outside. So it's delightful. But I can read a different quote now, which is quite exciting. Because I'm not going to read what was on there. Unless I didn't print it. Because I didn't think I was going to read it. It's in there somewhere. Nope, it's not. Oh, well. It's an Ernest Holmes quote about how really our age isn't relevant, that it's how we feel, whether we're up, whether we're down, whether we're fearful, whether we're happy, that it's about being in that space, in that presence of knowing that we're connected to the one, that we're connected to each other, that there is really nothing that can get in the way of that except for our forgetting. So when I read the quote for the little passage for today, it made me think of the MasterCard ad, and it talks about time-related things. And so one of the first ones was a father and a son going to a ball game. And it was obviously a long time ago because the prices they quoted are nothing like what it would take to get into a ball game today. But it was two baseball tickets, $28, hot dog, popcorn, and drink, $18, autographed baseball, $45, time with your 11-year-old son, priceless. Now, this is going to tell you more about me than you probably want to know. This is the funny one that I love. Shows a woman pulling up this fancy little dress out of a box. Sexy outfit, $250. New lipstick, $40. Evening bag, $90. The look on your ex-boyfriend's face, priceless. I saw that when I went, oh, that one's just a little too funny. I got to bring that one in with me. But today I'm really, the title of the talk is It's Priceless. And I'm going to talk about those things that are priceless. And really, there are two ways that the ancient Greeks measured time. Chronos is that linear time that we live in. And another one called kairos, which is, for me, the priceless part. So if you look up in a lot of sources, when you look up why people don't do things, if it's not a psychological journal that will have very complex definitions, it will say the number one, time. Why do you do this? I don't have time. The next one is always something related to fear or perfectionist issues. I just enrolled in ministerial school 20 years after I should have started. But it's all in God's time. The lack of energy or feeling overwhelmed, not inspired, passing the buck, it's somebody else's fault that I'm not doing this or that, not enough money. And then the biggest one, I think, for me, is what we use a lot in our life. And that is, it's until, the if-then statement. If this happens, then I'll do that. If this doesn't happen, then I'll do that. That if-then statement in life is that process of letting the outside control us as opposed to going within and looking and saying, what is mine to do? So there is a quote by William Penn, and the Pennsylvania was named after him, and it's from the beginning of the 17th century, or the 18th century, actually. And he says, time is what we want most, but what we use worst, which is language of that day, probably more than I think my Ruby Calvert, my English teacher, would have not graded that sentence well. And then Leo Christopher, who's an author, There's only one thing more precious than our time, and that's who we spend it on. So there's another one that isn't in there that I found last night, and it's by J.R.R. Tolkien, the man who wrote all the Ring stories. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. I'm going to do two quick more quotes, and then we're going to roll. So Jonathan Estrin is a photographer for the New York Times, a writer, a filmmaker. The way we spend our time defines who we are. Now, I will tell you, sometimes I like that. And sometimes when I think about that, I think, damn. Okay, maybe it's time for a new choice. And then Steve Jobs, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Now, I will tell you that for many, many years in my life, I lived my parents' life. What they thought I should be, what they thought I should do, what they thought. And I found, so one of the teachers that I worked with for years said one time, if you've been trying to do something for a really long time and it hasn't happened, there's a pretty good chance that it's not your good idea. It's someone else's good idea for you. And when I heard that, I went, I can just wipe off a whole lot of things from my list because it was like clearly, oh, mom, dad, sister, the minister, my teacher. Let's get to all those. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the two different types of time. So chronos is the linear time. That's the time that we can measure. It's minutes and hours and days and weeks and months and years. And it doesn't, it's very concrete and it is sequential. And Newton, the Newtonian theory, Mr. Gravity, he said it's something absolute in reality, regardless of human perception. And that's, in my perspective, so not true. There are cultural aspects to time. There are several tribes in the Amazon that don't have any concept of time at all. There is no linguistics at any level in their language for time. And the Hopi have only two words. They have no future tense or past tense in their language. They have two words, sooner and later. And that's the closest they come to the definition of time. And in Indonesia, there's an Aboriginal tribe that they refer to it as rubber time, that it's flexible and it's totally dependent upon the circumstances around you. So we live in this place of linear time. It's how our cultures run. It's how our brain is hardwired to work. And when I heard somebody say this, I went, this is another one I don't like. And it is, the opposite of faith is not fear. The opposite of faith is control. And again, I went, damn, on that one. Because if I think about it, when I have faith, I'm willing to be in the flow. I'm willing to let things unfold and be willing to see and listen for something more than my good idea. Wendy Craig Purcell has a great book called Ask Yourself This. And it's just a series of questions. If you're a journaler, it's a great book. She breaks it down into different categories. But one of her questions is, how much time do you give God to work it out? Some days, pretty good. Other days, got that. Sorry, I'll take that one now. Right? And we all do that, I think. So looking at what Ernest Holmes says, he says, we're probably on the verge of a great spiritual awakening. People are so tired of looking for things where they do not exist that they are going to more and more completely open their thought to the realization that spirit is an active presence. But if we spend our entire time trying to find out why and why it does not work, we will never find out why it does work and how it does work. So the second kind of time, so linear time, we all live in that. We struggle with it. We think there's not enough of it. Sometimes it drains our energy because we try to cram too much into it. And then if we look at the Greek's other, it's kairos. And that is, the definitions are fabulous. Kairos time is the appointed time in the purpose of God. It's the time that God, when God acts, it's God's time. And they describe it frequently as a season. So if you look in the Bible, Ecclesiastes is there's a time for every purpose under heaven. The birds turned it into a song. I think we're probably all old enough to remember that. And it's always in the now. It's in the present moment. That is one of the primary characteristics of Kairos time, in the moment. And it's sort of the opportune moment. It's when things flow and unfold. It's a suitable moment, the right moment, a favorable moment, but it's always a moment. The state of flow, it can't be measured, it can only be experienced, unlike linear time, which is all about measurement. So learning to live or think about or be in Chronos time, for me, when I have that, that's what's priceless. Because it feels completely different. It's that the joy is the most infallible sign of the presence of God. When I stop and I let go of control, much easier said than done, then I can begin to be in this unmeasured experience. There's a poem called Desiderata by Max Earlman, and one of the lines is, "No doubt the universe is unfolding as it should." And when we understand that and believe that, that's being in Kairos time. Because in Kairos time, everything feels possible. It's qualitative, it's not quantitative. And one person because I went down a rabbit hole with this, I always do when I'm researching things. One person said, it's the strategies of God. And I went, well, I like that because I like to plan and I like things to have an organization. So if I can think of the flow as God's strategy, maybe it'll be a little easier for me to let go when I am clutching on to it. I think it's Anne Lamott that says, everything I've ever let go of is filled with scratch marks. Sad but true for many of us. So we live our day-to-day lives in Chronos time, but there is always something where our spirit is calling to us. Kairos is always calling to us. I have every Saturday I have coffee with our senior minister, and we talk about things from the church and us and the world and cosmic things. We spend way too much time drinking coffee and talking, but both of us talk about there's a tautness inside of us. And sometimes it's like you can feel a cord just pulling you in a certain direction. That is that Kairos. That is the time of God saying, come on, let's go. Now's the time. Now's the time. And the Bible talks about our time here on this earth as a series of opportunities. We don't want to keep our heads down and focus, work, and miss the opportunities around us to serve others and to do good. That's the version, I don't know if you know the version of the Bible called The Message. It's a really great, it's a fun version of the Bible. I think it's a Baptist minister who went through the Bible and wrote it in a way that made sense to him in our current language. So when I'm looking up references, I will look at several different versions, but it's usually the Message that makes you kind of go, oh, nice. So there's a paradoxical part of this whole concept of Kairos time, because everything spiritual is really paradoxical, in my opinion, and that's when two things that appear to be opposite are true at the same time. And it doesn't make sense how they can be true at the same time, but they are. But it is not, so sometimes talking about that flow of God, it feels like it's a passive thing. And sometimes it is, but usually it is a part of those magical moments that we tap into that have value in each and every single second. It's the most fleeting of moments. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with depending on who you talk to, one who is most commonly referred to in our movement is Michael Beckwith creating this, but I learned it long ago in Unity with 4 V's. It's the stages or the qualities of spiritual development, and it's in one quadrant. There's a victim, and that's where everything is done to us. And then you shift up into victor. That's where we learn the law. That's where we understand that we have choice, that we have control mostly over what we respond to, but then we also learn we have control over what manifests in our life. Because when it's our atmosphere of thought that shows up in our life, not necessarily one word. I'm not a fan of this is killing me. It's like, no, it's really not killing me. And I will have friends who will go, don't say that. It's like, well, it's really not in my atmosphere of thought. In this moment, it is, but it's not on an ongoing basis in my atmosphere of thought. So we learn in the second stage to understand the law and how to use it. And I believe that you have to have a good understanding of how to use the law until you can slide into the third. And that is being a vessel where we're in the flow. And then Kairos time pops up in there sometimes, but also in the fourth stage, and that's those aha moments. That's those times when you go, one of the greatest times where I ever felt connected to God. I had been dealing with some things. I was driving down the road, and I realized some things were manifesting. And probably the greatest prayer of gratitude I've ever given was just, yay, God! I was just so excited, But people think we should be able to live in that fourth kingdom, in that fourth stage. The truth is, that's really not meant to be a place where you can dwell. It's those moments. Richard Rohr, who is a fabulous, I think he's a Franciscan, talks a lot about those moments where we go, oh, I get it. Oh, yeah. This is good. This is beautiful. Just those moments, whether it's something in your life or a sunset or a time with a friend or whatever it may be. So it's about realizing that we are actually always moving into these varying aspects of spiritual development. There are times when we all feel like a victim. I will tell you, I had a flood in my garage, and I had a tussle with the insurance company, and I was feeling sorry for myself for a little while until I went snap out of it. But it's like there are times inevitably that we all feel like that, like something is being done to us. But when you understand the law, you can go, oh, I have control over what I think and what I do. And then it's one of the real hard questions is, how do I know what's God's good idea, what's my good idea, and what's somebody else's good idea for me? So Carolyn Mace, who I really love her work, she said, how do you know when it's God's good idea? When you go, are you kidding me? Because God has a much bigger picture than we do, and absolutely knows that we have within us everything that it takes to do whatever we need to do. But that Kairos time, that idea of God, can also be disruptive, right? Because we all kind of get cruising. Just comfortable. It's working. You want me to go to ministerial school? I've been saying no for 20 years. What makes you think I would say yes today? It's that kind of you get comfortable. And so it becomes sometimes God's good idea is one of those things that says, yeah, it is good, and there's better. The coach that I work with one time said to me, would you be willing to let go of everything good in your life if you knew there was something better? And I had to honestly say, I don't know. I don't know that I could do that. There's some things I'm not willing to risk because that's our nature, right? But God's idea is always bigger. And when we have that, do I really want to let go? Do I really want to go into, are you kidding me? It's disruptive. So it's about really realizing that there are different ways that those good ideas of God show up, and ways Kairos time shows up. And the first one is called the brick wall moment. And culturally, we had a brick wall moment for a year plus, right? Everything stops, everything's falling to pieces. You don't quite know how it's going to get put back together. It is one of those things where you begin then to ask questions. And I think that's one of the many things that came out of the pandemic, is that each of us had a time to stop and ask questions. And so brick wall moments. The second one are speed bump moments. And that is, it's those things that keep happening over and over. And you feel the same way each time that it happens. And it's then a willingness to step into that thing that keeps coming back. One of the things I heard Pema Chodron talk about one time, she said she was sitting on an airplane and the man next to her gave her his Time magazine. And I thought, you're sitting next to Pema Chodron and you're giving her a magazine? She would probably duct tape my mouth because I'd be asking her so many questions. But she said there was, in that Time magazine, there was a study that said people would rather experience physical pain than uncertainty. Our brains are hardwired to object to uncertainty. So speed bump moments are those times where things keep coming back and keep coming back, and it gives you the opportunity to stop and say, is this how I want to feel? Is this what I want to do? Is there a way that I can open and expand to something greater? And then mirror moments. So mirror moments are sometimes fabulous and sometimes not so, because it's those times when God or the universe, however you choose to look at it, is holding up a mirror so that we can see some things in ourselves. Sometimes it's looking at some hard truths, and other times it's quite enlightening. And so those mirror moments we can use in that time of God, to be willing to own what's ours. Because Ernest Holmes talked about look a discordant fact in the face before you turn to truth. You have to own that as happening right now, as a circumstance, not a permanent circumstance, but it's there. Because it's like taking a trip. If I want to get back to my house in Sun City and I put my GPS in Sun City West, it's going to take me somewhere different. If I don't put in where I am, I put where I think I am, then I may never get there, right? Because you have to own where you are. And then actually two more parts of time, the vision moment. And those are those times when we're in that space where God speaks to us, through us, and as us, where we have clarity on our next step, where we say, this is it. You get a combination of maybe that taut being pulled towards something, or just a piece that says, this is now. This is where I'm supposed to be going, what I'm supposed to be doing. And when it's present, when you really see and feel that, the fear kind of falls away. It may still be there, but its power falls away. And any of the disturbance or disruption falls away. Because when we stop and slow down and listen, and we're in that precious holy moment, that's when we can hear that still small voice. And it's also when we can agree with the still small voice. Because there are times in my life where I hear the still small voice and I go, yeah, not today. Or, yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that. Not a good solution. not a good path. I argue, I don't know about you, I argue with God on a regular basis. Fortunately, I have a definition of God that doesn't, send me to hell for that. But so it's that process of knowing, that vision moment. And then the last one is the sublime. That's the fourth kingdom. That's the time when you see beauty and joy. And here's a quote from Richard Rohr. He says, Kairos time is where you stop and say, oh my God, this is it. I get it. This is perfect as it is. It doesn't get any better than this. And then we realize that it can. So, from my perspective, looking at how this all works for me is I know when I'm caught up in Chronos time. I am busy. I have a list. I'm leaving for Pine Top in the morning with my husband and my dogs. I have not one list. I have my grocery list. I have what I packed for the dogs. I have what I packed for me, what I packed for him, what I have to do before I leave. It's like I have a book of lists to go away for a week. Chronos time, right? Complete Chronos time. And yesterday I was pretty grumpy because things got in the way of getting my list done. So I know that when I get into that space where I'm just kind of chomping at the bit or just a rub, I can stop and go, linear time. I'm in linear time, not in God's time. I'm not willing to surrender to the flow. And so it's about really understanding that that flow is always available to us. That moment is always available to us. We simply have to stop and be present. Mindfulness is being present without judgment. That's the hard part, right? Sometimes we can be present, but we still are going should, shouldn't, good, bad, right, wrong, maybe not. To be present in the moment without judgment. And that without judgment allows our hearts to open, to see all that there is available to us, to see that nothing can stand in the way of God. Absolutely nothing. I was taught that if a lot of people set an intention to be here, and we're here in consciousness, everything from here to here has to come up to be revealed and healed. Sometimes that's great and sometimes that's not. But I really feel like that's where we are in our culture right now. We are in a space where there are a lot of things coming up to be healed. And it's easier to get through those times, those disruptive times of change, when we can stop and say, make more time for Kairos and less time for Chronos. Nelson Mandela has a quote, we must use time wisely and forever realize that the time is always ripe to do it right. It's always ripe to do it. It's always ripe. So, in the practicing the principles, I'm going to end with there are a couple of things. One of the first things, it has to do with that looking the facts in the face before you turn to the truth. And that is own your choices about where you are, about what you think, about what you do. Don't beat yourself up over it. Be kind. I just finished a great class that I actually have taken twice now with Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, and they are sort of the national or international experts on self-compassion. And that's about learning to be kind to yourself. So own your choices without judgment and be kind. And Brene Brown, whose book you're reading, I'm certified to teach her stuff. And one of my favorite quotes of hers, you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you can't have both. And I always add, at the same time, right? But sometimes it's about standing to get into that Kairos time, to get into that flow of God. You have to be willing to stand and say, I choose courage. Because sometimes to get into the flow of God, it does require courage. A lot of life requires courage. And then what I actually said, more kairos and less chronos, which is live more and control less. And then the last one, and this is the question that I want you to go away with, and that is, what could 1 week of living in chronos time, carologically, instead of chronologically, what would 1 week of that living do for you? Wouldn't that be amazing? To really focus and say, can I choose differently now? Can I choose to be open to the wisdom of the divine? Can I choose to be open to the experience of God, to the ideas of God, to the beauty, to the wonder, to the awe and joy that comes with the presence of God? That joy, that most infallible sign of God's presence. What could you do with your week if you were constantly choosing again? So take time to focus on what's priceless. And to me, that is being willing to say, I'm going to let go of my need to control and turn it over to the power of the divine. So thank you.